I am just a normal person, and through challenging situations that I've found myself in life, I've cultivated something within me to grow and push through those moments. But you have to make the conscious effort to move towards your goal. And then you have to apply consistent effort and discipline in order to cultivate that. You got to put in the work every day to getting towards that goal. And that consistency is the key to unlocking incredible human abilities that we can all possess.
Spartans, listen up.
We need to sleep better. So how do you sleep better? Never thought about it before. And so I met Jack, I met Essentia. Pay attention to the mattress you sleep on because it's loaded with chemicals.
Recovery, cooling, and pressure relief, all in one mattress. Up to 60% more deep and REM sleep. Less inflammation, faster bounce back. No toxins, no EMFs, no BS.
My buddy Jack over at Essentia, he's kind enough to give us a code for the Spartan community. That's DECA, that's Tough Mudder, all of us. Use Spartan25, get a discount. Prioritize your sleep so you can sleep faster, you can do more burpees, you can train more, you can get healthier. When you sleep well, you live well.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe DeSena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe DeSena, CEO and founder of Spartan, host of the Hard Way podcast. Got my buddy Kegan Gill on the line. He is a Navy lieutenant, retired, performance coach, superhuman. Wait till you hear this story. You're going to be blown away. You're probably the only guy in history that's jumped out of a plane at 675 miles an hour, right?
There's one Air Force guy who ejected slightly faster even and lived to tell the tale, but it's pretty unusual, that's for sure.
Did that piss you off? Did you want to do it again at slightly faster speeds?
I at least got the record for the Navy, so I'm cool with that. I'll leave it as it is, you know?
So I always like to find out where somebody where a survivor, whatever that means, where and how they grew up. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in northern Michigan for the most part. I lived in Colorado a little bit before that. In the mountains, I learned to ski out in Wolf Creek and some fluffy white powder, but moved to Michigan when I was pretty young, and I would definitely call northern Michigan home, but grew up in the woods, mountain biking, backpacking, camping, hunting, fishing, just doing the stuff little kids are supposed to be doing out there, climbing trees, getting dirty. I had a dad who was an Iron Man, always doing endurance stuff, swimming, across the bays in Grand Traverse Bay. I'd go out and be a spotter. So I always had that kind of exposure to that mentality growing up. And so, I got into soccer, was a real big soccer player, ended up being a wrestler in high school, but always had a passion for athletics, the outdoors. I definitely didn't fit in a classroom sitting there filling out Scantron sheets. But then when I graduated high school, there was a little flight program where I grew up in Northwestern Michigan College, a little community college. Had an awesome flight program that was affordable. And so I ended up going there and started flying. And by the time I was a junior in college, I was a certified flight instructor. I ended up flying as a flight instructor for the college while I finished my bachelor degree. And then I ended up being a corporate pilot for about a year, flying all over the country. Really cushy lifestyle, really good pay, but there was something more I wanted in life. And so I had a buddy who was applying to go to Navy officer candidate school. And he kind of filled me in like, hey, if you want to go fly for the Navy, it's something you could do. And at the time I thought you had to have a dad that's an admiral, you had to go to the Naval Academy. I just didn't understand that a community college kid like me could go fly fighter jets for the Navy. But I put in a package, I got accepted, and then went to Navy officer candidate school, which is, getting yelled at by Marine Corps drill instructors on your face, doing push-ups and all that good stuff. And then I went to flight school for the Navy. And while I had a flight slot going in, you had to earn it, and there's a lot of cuts between medical stuff, vision, anthros, where they measure your body to make sure you're going to fit in the aircraft that you want. There's a lot of cutting that goes on. It's incredibly competitive, but through flight school, I did pretty well. I worked my ass off. There's a lot of guys in that community that are, photographic memories, D1 athletes, just superhumans. And I felt kind of a bit of imposter syndrome being the community college kid, but I was a hard worker, and that's really what got me through flight school. and excelling. And I selected the F-18 Super Hornet out of training, and then it's kind of living my dream.
I want to go back into the woods and then watching your dad, train. Was dad pushing that, you needed to, or you were just watching and kind of soaking it in?
Yeah, just kind of soaking it in. And at the time, I remember he'd come back from these runs and he'd be missing his toenails and his feet were all messed up. And I was like, why would anybody ever do that? And it wasn't actually until I was in college that I started racing triathlons and doing pretty decent at it. But he never pushed. And actually, I kind of wish he pushed me a little more. But he would be like, hey, I'm going to go do this sprint triathlon. Do you want to join me? And I would go do it. And then next time he'd be like, you want to do an Olympic distance triathlon? And I'd go and do it. I never did an Ironman with him, but that would be pretty cool. He's still doing some stuff. He's not doing Ironmans anymore. He's in his 70s, but
let's get him out. We got to get you and him out to one of our events. That's a great idea. We've had a lot of, father, daughter, father, son, mom, etc. And it's nice to see them cross the finish line together. Nobody's breaking any records, but it's a nice thing to do together and train together for.
That would be very cool.
So take me, the other thing that jumped out at me, take me to that day where because you were a commercial pilot, you probably flew a bunch of tiny little planes as you were training. And then you're on the deck somewhere about to get in for the first time to this F-18?
Yeah, the Super Hornet. It was surreal. Just like putting the gear on, putting on the G-suit, putting on the harness and the survival vest and all this stuff, this helmet, and walking out onto a flight line to this massive aircraft that I'd seen at air shows growing up. And it was kind of like I had to pinch myself. Like, I can't believe I get to fly this thing. But there's also so much stress and preparation and pressure on you that quickly takes over and you're just back into going through all your training. But it was absolutely surreal to get the opportunity to do that.
What year was that, would you say, when you first got in that plane?
The early summer of 2012 was the first time I got into the Super Hornet.
I was coming out of financial crisis, was 2009. Social media was becoming big right around then. How old were you?
I was in my early 20s. I think I was about 24 or so when I first started flying the Super Hornet. Maybe a little more, actually, 25 or 26.
Most pilots getting into those things around that age, low 20s?
Yeah, I mean, the average age on the aircraft carrier is like in the low 20s, and the pilots are some of the older folks because we've been through the training and had to go to college first. So, yeah, we got a lot of our national defense is being run by guys in their 20s or even their teens.
Where do you think you would have, like at that point in time, you're getting into the plane, where are you headed in your mind? Where are you getting deployed? Like what's going to happen to you?
Yeah, it was a very active time in the Middle East. Everything was ramping up. Guys were going on combat missions and dropping and employing kinetics on almost every flight. So as I was coming out of that flight training, I knew like we're going to go into the real thing. And we were doing a lot of preparation training with like the SEAL teams and special forces. So that was going to be our bread and butter, is going in and working with SEAL JTACs or multi-branch JTACs. We were working with the 160th, which is the Army Special Forces helicopter unit. Yeah, we knew we were going to go in and do some close air support, was really what was going off at the time.
You were nervous?
I was really looking forward to it, honestly. I was, it's like you spend all this time training for years and years and years, and that's sort of your validation as a pilot, is when you actually get to go and employ in country and come back and really do your job, really help some good guys on the ground. That's like what we live for. That's what we train for.
And then so look, this ultimately ends in disaster, but thank God you're still here. When did that happen relative to that first flight? Like, was that years later or was that?
Yeah, that was, let's see. It was about a year and a half later, almost 2 years later. I was in my first fleet squadron, VFA 143, the Pukin Dogs out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. We were in our workup cycle preparing to go to the Middle East, and actually what became one of the most active combat deployments in the modern warfare. There was a ton of activity when those guys deployed. So we were really gearing up for the real deal. And on this day, we're going out to practice. We train how we're going to fight, and we practice the skill sets that we may not use every day in real combat, but just like a special forces member is going to train in hand-to-hand combat, even though they hopefully don't have to get in a hand-to-hand altercation. We train air combat maneuvering, or BFM, basic fighter maneuvering, in the event that we get into a long-range missile fight in air-to-air and we end up within the visual arena with somebody else. And this is probably the epitome of what people think when they think fighter pilot, is dogfighting, wrapping it up with one or more aircraft within close range. So you're pulling high Gs, you're operating multiple weapon systems, defensive systems. It's, a lot of going on. It's like four-dimensional chess at the speed of sound. It can be mind-bending, but also what I thought was the absolute most fun. And being a shorter, stockier build dude, I was just like built for dogfighting. I could pull a lot of Gs and be very comfortable. I was training really hard at that time with CrossFit and lifting. And so I was just, I loved it. That was my thing that kept me going on those days that were hard and challenging, was the fact that, hey, I get to go up and dogfight today. But anyways, we're prepping for this mission. And as I'm going for the flight, my buddy at the duty desk is, the pilots kind of rotate through that duty. As a joke, he had put up on the whiteboard our working airspace out over the Atlantic Ocean that day. And he had put all these GPS tagged sharks that he got off the Shark Tracker app. These guys get tagged for research purposes. And it just so happened there was a 3,500 pound, 16-foot great white shark named Mary Lee, the second largest white shark I think ever tagged, was right underneath my airspace. So we're joking before the flight with our morbid sense of humor that you develop in that community to get through it is, hey, today's a terrible day to eject. You got below freezing air temperatures. The ocean's churned up from the wind. You've got 37 degree Fahrenheit water at the buoy temperature. And there's a great white shark underneath your area that's massive. So we're just joking about this right before the flight. And about 45 minutes to an hour after that conversation, I'm out practicing dogfighting over that airspace, over that ocean. All of a sudden, on the last fight of the day, we had set up a little lower and faster than we typically did, called the fights on. And as our two jets blasted at each other like a couple medieval knights in this high-speed jousting match, I rolled my aircraft inverted and pulled down towards the ocean in a steep dive. Now, normally this maneuver would take about 5,000 feet of airspace. However, when I initiated that maneuver at 10,500 feet. So I should have had plenty of space and even had room above our hard deck, which we put at 5,000 feet for training purposes to keep us a little safer. But right as I hit bullseye, nose low, pointed straight at the ocean in the jet, the aircraft system thought there were bombs on the wings that weren't actually there. And so it overrode my control input, even though I had the stick all the way in my lap telling this thing to turn as hard as it could. I'm pulling 7.5 Gs. I can feel all that in my body and my head. If you imagine that my head and helmet probably weighed about 20 pounds on the deck at 1 G, now at almost 8 times that, that's like having 150, 160 pounds just on my head. And you're looking around, your whole body weighs over 1,600 pounds. So you can feel that. And all of a sudden that just eased. And I found myself staring at the ocean that was rapidly approaching from below. The aircraft started yelling at me, altitude, altitude, pull up, pull up. And 2 seconds from impact, at 695 miles per hour, I yanked the ejection handle between my legs. And then I discovered that the human body is not aerodynamic at the speed of sound. I was 2 seconds from impact at 51 degrees nose low, so a very steep dive. And as I came out into that airflow, I was at 695 miles per hour very briefly. That impact was an explosive force, 100 times of a Category 1 hurricane, instantaneously impacting my body. So that force ripped my helmet off my head, caused a traumatic brain injury. My face was all black and blue. My eyes were swollen up from impacting the air. I broke my C1 in my neck, the top vertebrae. My left scapula shattered. My arms just ragdolled violently, shattering both my upper arms, the humerus bone. This humerus tore through my right brachial artery, causing rapid internal bleeding. My left forearm shattered the radius and ulna and severed the median nerve, which controls the left hand. The gear on my vest all ripped off. The dry suit that I was wearing to protect me from the cold ocean shredded open from the speed. My feet were flailing so violently in that airflow that the steel-toe boots on my feet became like wrecking balls, and they smashed open both my lower legs. So I had 2 open tib-fib fractures, chunks of bone falling out, bleeding out of my legs. And then I plummeted into that icy cold, churning Atlantic swell. The parachute that had just saved my life then sunk underneath that churning swell. We have a system that's supposed to automatically disconnect as soon as it goes into salt water so we don't get drowned alive by our parachute. Because upper body injuries are so common in high-speed ejections, you often can't reach up and manually disconnect the coke fittings. However, that system malfunctioned. We've got a lot of gear that's like Vietnam-era stuff that doesn't always receive the funding that it deserves, and so that system malfunctioned. And then I spent the next 2 hours just getting drowned alive by that parachute. I remember getting just pulled under and everything going black, and anybody who's ever been held under by a big wave or something, when you need a breath of air and you can't get it, you know how terrifying that feeling is. But eventually I sucked in a lot of water, went unconscious, and woke up about 2 weeks later in a level 1 trauma center.
So how long were you flailing around in the water before they came and found you?
It was approximately 2 hours before I got picked up. I was conscious when they found me, but I don't remember it. I was found by a Navy H-60 Seahawk helicopter. The rescue swimmer jumped into that frigid ocean water, got down in the water with me. He said he hooked into the titanium carabiner on my harness, and he had done this in the pool training, but he said that the force of the parachute pulled us under like it was a bag of bricks, you know? And even though him being a super fit rescue swimmer, swimming as hard as he could not fight the force of it as it pulled us under. And he said he looked under the water and he could just see this dark blue abyss and a tangled mess of paracord. But his training kicked in, he got out his knife and he was able to cut loose all the paracord, get me disentangled and back to the surface, and lifted up into the helicopter. Fortunately, those guys got me to a level 1 trauma center in Norfolk, Virginia, after about a 40-minute flight. And when I got there, I was a mess. I mean, my core body temp was at 87 degrees Fahrenheit. I should have been dead from hypothermia, but they said that the hypothermia that I had at that extreme, it actually constricted the blood flow so that I didn't bleed to death. And they also think it helped to preserve my brain function with the brain injury. I spent 2 weeks in an induced coma, undergoing over a dozen trauma surgeries. They performed fasciotomies on all 4 of my extremities. They rebuilt my skeleton with titanium rods and steel plates, so I have a no-kidding Wolverine skeletal system at this point. And when I came to, I was really confused between the drugs and the head injury. And they kind of eventually came in and told me what had happened and said, hey, you've been in this high-speed ejection. Your arms and legs are paralyzed. You'll likely never walk again. We don't think you'll ever use your arms or hands again. And your military flying career is over. But if you want me to do something, tell me that it's impossible, because that just motivated me that much more. And every day just became working towards the goal of getting better. And I had a lot of darkness in that moment. Like, I could have just been enveloped by it and crushed and just given up on life, and found myself addicted to a bunch of opioids for the rest of my life. And it was almost expected that was what was going to happen. But in that darkness, I found this little spark that was maybe cultivated as a kid of being a smaller dude, getting picked on and beat up, and kind of always being this underdog that wanted to prove people wrong and fight back. And in that darkness, I found that little spark in me that had developed as a kid. And instead of feeding the darkness, I started to feed that little spark with, well, what would it be like if I do get back? What's it going to be like to come back into this hospital in my flight suit with my wings on my chest and tell these guys, look what I did, I'm flying again. And so that's the goal I started to work towards, and that's where I started to put my energy, positive energy. And as you know, like if you're in a hard event, an ultra endurance event or something, and you're just grinding away, you get to those dark moments where you get to make a conscious choice of, do I give up in this moment? Or do I feed that little spark of, what if this is possible? And as you know, when you start feeding that spark of what's possible, it grows and it cultivates into a flame and an inferno, and it can drive you way beyond what you think is possible. I spent 2 years rehabbing, overcoming prescription drug addiction, and I returned to the cockpit of the F-18 Super Hornet as an active duty pilot, despite all the odds.
A question, I guess, for those listening out there, maybe you can give some advice, like, what should the regular person do? You're not regular. What should the regular person do? They're stuck on the couch, they're in that dark place, whatever reason. They're going through some financial issues, relationship, whatever it may be, right? What do you recommend there? And then the follow-up question would be around the opioids, because that just annoys the hell out of me that folks do end up addicted to, substances.
Yeah, I mean, the secret is I am just a normal person. And through challenging situations that I found myself in life, I've cultivated something within me to grow and push through those moments. But I think the secret is we all have that within us, but you have to make the conscious effort to move towards your goal. And then you have to apply consistent effort and discipline in order to cultivate that. It's not going to just come to you. You can't just close your eyes and wish that you're a super athlete and it's going to happen. No, you can close your eyes and visualize where you want to be, but then you got to put in the work every day to getting towards that goal. And that consistency is the key to unlocking incredible human abilities that we can all possess. And I think that we all possess this human spirit that can get through incredible challenges, whether that's you're dealing with obesity and you're stuck on the couch and you're sick and you just want to get better. Well, start making the small changes today. And it doesn't have to be all the way at once, but if you can start to make small positive changes and steps each day, and you keep taking those steps, you're probably going to get kicked back down a few rungs at times. But if you get back on the ladder and you keep going, that is the secret. And that's what sets apart people who are able to do incredible things and the people that give up and they bask in their sorrow, which in my opinion is far more challenging to deal with than pushing through those hard times to grow.
I agree with that. It sounds cliche, but it's one foot in front of the other.
It really is cliche. It's almost so obvious, but it's the truth. And as far as the opioids go, yeah, unfortunately, if you're in the VA medical system as a veteran, if you're in the VA hospitals like I was in my recovery, you're basically a lab rat and you're a cash cow product for the pharmaceutical industry that has grasped hold of the VA system and makes tremendous amount of money off of it. And even is at the point where they get to dictate the policies that are employed in the facilities to favor using their products. And it's sad, but it's the truth. And it doesn't matter how good the people are that work at the VA or how good the leadership is. At the end of the day, the pharmaceutical industry gets to use it as their cash cow and dictate policy. But the good thing is just like overcoming the challenges of overcoming physical injury or whatever you're dealing with, it's the same thing with those pills. Is I was told that I was going to have to take these the rest of my life, and the amount of stuff that I had been put on, this cornucopia of meds. I was on amitriptyline, tramadol, trazodone, oxycodone, OxyContin, and then massive doses. I was taking 2,400 milligrams a day of gabapentin or Neurontin, which is supposed to be a non-addictive form of pain med for nerve pain, and that couldn't be further from the truth. That was actually the most brutal med that I had to come off of. But I found myself that the pain management team was just like, just keep taking your meds. You just got to keep taking them. And it was really bizarre because they would give me the gabapentin and say, well, this one is so you don't have to get addicted to opioids. But then they were just giving me both of them. And it never seemed like they took one away. It was just always adding more and more. And I got to the point where it's like, I saw where that train was going and I got off. And instead of listening to the pain management team, I started to wean myself off of all of my meds. And I started with the amitriptyline, and I would just do a little bit by little bit of weaning myself off one. And then I did the next one and then the next one. I got to the oxy, and I thought that was going to be the hardest one. And that was challenging over several weeks of just taking a little bit less each day and seeing how my body reacted. But when I got to the gabapentin, that one took me months to get off of, in part because I was on such high doses, but I was feeling sick and nauseous and vomiting and just felt like garbage, but I knew I had to get myself off. If you can do it with a physician that's willing to work with you to get off meds, that's probably the best option. I just figured out how to do it myself because I didn't feel the physicians, I felt they were trained to keep me on the meds, not to help me get off of them. But eventually I was able to wean myself off all of that, but I replaced it with eating healthy, nutritious foods, getting good sleep, getting regular exercise. And I think you have to nourish your body as you go through that process to allow it to heal.
It's annoying to hear. It's great to hear for you, but it's annoying to hear what the system does. I mean, it sounds just like the Netflix movies. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but they reference and showcase like the Sackler family who came up with, it's just terrible. It's really terrible.
Yeah, it's huge profits at the expense of the patients.
Imagine the Civil War, right? There was no, a lot of pain, but like, just deal with it.
And I think there's a place for those meds in the short term. Like when I was coming out of all those surgeries and my arms and legs were all cut open and scarred up, like I was happy to have the pain meds. But that shouldn't be a replacement to just mask those symptoms for the rest of your life. We need to address the underlying issue, heal the underlying issue. And I think there's a lot more that can be done that's not currently done in the hospital systems or the VA to actually heal the person at the core and the foundation, rather than just masking it with pain meds and other meds. This is sort of the happy ending of my story, is that I went back to fly Super Hornets, but there's actually a whole nother chapter of what happened to me after that, as I started to experience effects of brain injury through the course of my career, or what's now being called operator syndrome. The toll that it takes when you have repetitive brain injury, when you're getting G-force, launching off the aircraft carrier decks, crashing into the deck, the chronic stress and pressure that's on you, that starts to wear you down. And later in my career, I started to find myself really struggling mentally and wasn't able to really put a finger on what exactly was going on. And when I reluctantly sought help, the answer was, here, you just need to take these meds. Eventually that derailed my flying career, and I found myself dealing with suicide. I had a gun in my mouth at one point, and the only reason I didn't pull the trigger was my newborn son and my beautiful wife were asleep next to me, and I didn't want to wake them up. But the meds they were giving me for the psychological stuff and a PTSD diagnosis were far more challenging and destructive than even the pain meds were. I was eventually medically retired, and I found myself at the VA, and it was the same pattern that the pain meds were, which is, hey, you just need more of these meds. And the more of those meds I had, the more side effects, the more zoned out I was, the worse I felt at my core. And eventually I went into a full-blown psychosis. My wife found me completely naked one day. I had shaved off my hair in chunks, my eyebrows. I had a black garbage bag tied around my neck like a cape, because I thought I was going to go out into the snowy Michigan weather and fight crime like a superhero. She rushed me to the emergency room. I was pretty quickly admitted to the VA inpatient psychiatric facility in downstate Michigan, where when I came to and started to have lucid thought again, I saw truly abysmal care and treatment of American veterans. I had become a prisoner of the war on mental health that is raging beneath the veneer of our civilization, which is just throwing pills at it and not actually helping the person. In fact, most of the things done in that facility were exacerbating the issues I was having. Every 15 minutes, per their policy, which I bet was put in place by the pharmaceutical industry, they have to come into your room and shine a flashlight to make sure you're not hurting yourself. So every 15 minutes, you're already on an alerted state, dealing with PTSD symptoms, brain injury, psychoses, and now you have somebody coming into your room every 15 minutes and shining a flashlight. You can also hear other guys in the facility yelling and screaming all night in active psychoses, coming in your room and out of your room. You're often sharing a room with 2 to 6 other veterans. The food is just abysmal quality, ultra processed junk. It's literally probably the same food they're feeding the prisoners next door. It's not something that's nourishing. It's actually depleting your nourishment to just process the food that they're giving you. There's not fresh fruits or vegetables or healthy animal meats. It's just junk. You don't get to go outside more than maybe once a week into a concrete yard with a high-rise metal fencing all around it. There's no connection to nature. There's no sunlight. There's no exercise. These are all the same things that we do to prisoner of war situation. If you want to break somebody, you sleep deprive them, you malnourish them, you treat them less than human. We were dressed in prisoner scrubs as veterans, while the staff wore white lab coats. So there was this Stanford prison experiment dynamic going on in the facility. And when you are in and out of psychoses, people have a natural tendency to treat you like you're no longer there, even though you are at some level. So really all the same things that you do to a prisoner of war to break their will and get them to comply with whatever you want are being done to American veterans who are just trying to get help for severe mental health issues and brain injury that they sustained serving their country. And so I found that incredibly frustrating. I could see what was going on. It was all to lead you back to more meds and more meds and more meds, which if they had one thing there, it was a ton of meds. And in fact, if they had just cut one of those medications from your schedule each day, they could probably afford to feed you incredibly well-cooked food from a chef. But instead, it's the policies all dictated by the pharmaceutical industry to feed you those meds and do things. I honestly think they're doing things intentionally to drive you onto more medication. And maybe that's a morbid sense on it, but it was pretty ugly. I actually tried to escape that facility. Eventually, I got out with the support and advocacy of my family. And then I found a completely different way to heal the brain and nervous system when dealing with mental health issues. And that was largely holistic through prioritizing sleep, nutrition, exercise, connection to nature. Through the generosity of a network of nonprofit organizations, I was able to gain access to a whole lot of alternative modalities that are outside the mainstream medical system, including traumatic brain injury clinics, peptides, nutraceuticals, customized lab work so they could see actually what's going on with your physiology. Why are you not feeling good? Why is your testosterone so low? And doing all these things to help correct those issues at a physiological level rather than, hey, let's just talk about how you're feeling today and give you meds to mask those symptoms. I also gained access to psychedelic-assisted therapy, which, gave me a new sense of purpose, a new sense of hope, healed me on a much deeper level than I even realized I was looking for, and also helps incredibly with neuroregeneration and healing of the nervous system. And I went from barely able to read a paragraph without forgetting it, barely able to do the dishes, distant from my family, on the verge of divorce, estranged from my kids as I was just in such a dark place, to now getting my life back and being able to speak out about this stuff, because I know there are so many other people out there struggling. And you don't have to eject at the speed of sound to find yourself dealing with challenges in life and dealing with mental health issues. I think that's just part of being human, is having to deal with that stuff. And so
I love this. I mean, I love the story, and we got to get it out to more people, because you're right. I mean, all these veterans, it's not just veterans, by the way, right? Are just not being treated properly.
Yeah, it's really the opposite of what they need, is largely that's what's getting shoved down their throat through the VA. That's what is available through TRICARE if you're retired from the military. And those things are not doing anything to actually help you. They keep you in this sick cycle, the sick loop, which is great for the industry. It's great for their business model, but it's not good for the patient.
How do people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Kegan Smurf Gill. Smurf was my call sign in the Navy. You can go to my website, which is just kegangill.com. And you can find everything about me on there. You can find my book on Amazon. It's called Phoenix Revival. There's obviously a lot more to this story. We kind of hit some of the high notes here, but if you'd like to read more about my story, please pick up a copy. It's on paperback, hardcover, ebook, audiobook. It's on Audible, Phoenix Revival. And if you have questions, if you're going through your own challenges, please reach out to me either on my website or through Instagram. I do performance and health coaching with people now, helping guide people through their journey, whatever that may be, traumatic brain injury, just finding yourself not feeling good and you want to get better from wherever you're at. I can help you transition with some very practical guidance that you can apply to your life and get better.
I love it. We owe your dad, by the way. Your dad is the guy that got this whole thing on the right train.
Yeah, my dad, he was an Ironman growing up, and I always saw him doing that kind of stuff. And
well, it's just another toenail.
Just another toenail. Yeah.
All right, you're awesome. Thanks for coming aboard.
Thanks for having me.